To talk to Jerry Klein, call 570-1110 in Charlotte, 1-800-WBT-1110 long distance, and on Bell Atlantic Mobile, star 1110.
So let's look at this in a little bit different light for a few minutes more. I would like some of those of you who are a little bit more mature and advanced in years to call and talk to me about the way your life has progressed in this respect. I've been talking to a lot of people lately, my age or thereabouts. I'm 43, who have gotten to a point in their lives where they're beginning to realize that they're probably not going to get where they thought they would or where they expected themselves to get when they were younger. And they're struggling with whether that means they're a failure or not. And they're struggling to figure out whether that means that they have resigned themselves to settling for an average life that they used to think wasn't going to be their legacy. And I'm curious to know how other people deal with this. Men especially, and I guess increasingly women these days, are brought up, here's another stereotype, especially in a Jewish family, to expect yourself to end up being rich, famous, powerful, president of the company, doctor, lawyer. You know, you got the drift, right? You're brought up to most of us, I think, are taught to believe that we're supposed to do something, quote, important with our lives, something meaningful. I remember when I was close to hitting my bottom 8-9 years ago, or however long ago it was, when I was dealing with the treatment center and my cocaine addiction. I remember feeling at one point like I wanted to just give up, literally and figuratively. And at that point in my life, I really felt like it would be okay if I decided if I died. I really thought for a while that it would be all right if I just wasn't here anymore. Now, a lot of people get into that frame of mind one time or another in your life, over depression, over a breakup of a relationship, over a loss of a job. It's something I think that happens to most of us at one time or another. And I had gotten to the point where I felt like up until that point my life had been a failure, more or less, and that I might as well just quit. Now, I was not actively suicidal. I didn't have a plan. I didn't sit around thinking about whether tomorrow I would go find a couple of bottles of pills and go to sleep or whatever. But I had gotten to the point where if something happened to me, that's okay. It would have been all right. You know what stopped it? You know what helped me to turn around? I had 2 sons, and they were 7 years old. Or no, they were like 12 and 8 or 11 and 7 at that time. And I started thinking about what it would mean if me as their father, if I as their father gave up and died at that point, what kind of message would I be giving my kids? What kind of legacy would I have written about myself? Does anybody else think about that? Do any of you sit around and wonder, when my time comes to leave this earth, will anybody care? Will anybody remember me? Will the fact that I was alive mean anything? And it's not just the standard, what goes on my tombstone kind of thing that I'm talking about. It's more like, has your life been meaningful, worthwhile? What did you do? Are you here for 70 years just to sort of cruise by? Or are you here to do something important? And if you are, what does that mean? Does it mean that you've got to be an NBA basketball star? Does it mean that you have to be president of the company and make millions of dollars? Does it mean that you have to be president of the United States? If it does, most of us are going to be disappointed. Most of us are going to end up thinking of ourselves as failures of one kind or another. And I think that there's something really strange about that. I'm not sure that people used to live like this before there was TV, before there were movies, before there were music stars, before entertainment stars. I'm not sure people used to think about this stuff the same way we do now. And I often wonder if that's part of the reason that we have so much resentment of famous people, because they're in our face all the time now. I mean, it used to be when you lived in a little village on a farm, and you didn't have television to watch or a movie to go watch. I don't think people sat around dreaming about being rich and famous the way we do now, or expecting themselves to become rich and famous, and that if they don't, they've somehow failed or their lives have been wasted. It's a strange phenomenon that we've built up. We have these expectations, and we don't give people much affirmation or much confirmation for just being good, decent people. And we don't give ourselves that permission. Do we? Or am I the only one that thinks like this? Does anybody else notice that we don't value good, decent, average, common lives? That we're all supposed to be something glorious? Because it's not going to happen. We're not all going to discover the next medical breakthrough technique. We're not all going to get to be Neil Armstrong and be the first human being to walk on the moon. And if we can't, well, what's left? What is left for us to strive for? It's our expectation level. It's gotten distorted. And I've gotten more comfortable with all of this over the last decade or so, as I've gotten the chance to be around people who have become famous, most of them artists and musicians. And we talk about this. The first rule, and some of the callers earlier in this hour were referring to it. The first rule that you need to you need to understand when you see or are in the presence of someone who's famous or somebody you idolize, the first thing you need to remind yourself of is that they're a regular human being who deserves their privacy. And that's hard, because when you get into the public eye, we seem to have this expectation that they should be at our beck and call, that they should react to us and be available to us whenever we feel like it. But that's not the way they're made. When I do a concert in town, and when I bring somebody to this area who may be famous, I don't rush up to them and start gushing. Now, sometimes I really want to. There have been people who I've come into contact with in regards to scheduling a concert for them here, that I would have loved to go say, I want you to know how important you are to me and how much you've meant in my life. Joan Baez comes to mind. I respect Joan Baez, the folk singer, and the woman activist, the political activist, and I have for the better part of a quarter century. And back in 1989, I got a chance to bring her to town and spend a little time with her. Well, I was in heaven, folks. It was cool. I really enjoyed it. But the most striking part of that was realizing that Joan Baez is no different than you or I are, than we are. She gets up in the morning, has her problems, struggles with her feelings and her emotions and her ambitions and her dreams and her hurts and her disappointments the same way we do. These are regular people, but they can still be heroes, can't they? I grew up, in the first decade of my life, admiring John Kennedy. And this was before, I was 11 years old when he was assassinated. But I remember watching on the news, and respecting who he was and what he did, and hoping that someday I might be a little bit like him in some regards. And then after he died, and especially I guess the last 10 or 15 years, as all the gossip stories have come out about his sexual appetite, or about his infidelities, or about the mistakes that he made. Maybe this surprises you, some of you, but it hasn't diminished him to me. It hasn't changed my opinion of him, because I found out that he was human and had faults and made mistakes and struggled and did some things wrong and hurt some people. That really hasn't diminished him for me. But a lot of you now look upon him as someone who gets credit that he doesn't deserve, and that if only we had known then what we know now, we would never have followed him or trusted him or believed in him or been so willing to elevate him to a position of stature. And then I think about somebody like Bill Clinton, who I believe really cares and tries real hard to do what he believes is the right thing. And for some reason, we've been witness to this incredible effort to just destroy him as a human being, because he's a human being. So, the other night we were talking about the interview that Larry King did on Monday night with President Clinton and Vice President Gore, and some people were talking about the fact that by not wearing a suit coat, Larry King was being disrespectful of Bill Clinton. But at the same time, the papers are full of letters and editorials and news stories about Clinton's frailties or his mistakes. Is it not possible to still admire somebody even though you know that they screw up? Is it not possible? Because otherwise, then we're left with no heroes. We're left with no role models. We're left with no examples, with nothing to strive for, with nobody to try to be like. And isn't that a sad state of affairs if we get to that? I'm worried. My generation that grew up in the 60s or came of age in the 60s and early 70s watched all of our heroes get destroyed one way or another, either by their faults being exposed, or by watching them make mistakes in policy or attitude. And I remember getting to the point where I felt like I didn't have any heroes anymore, that there were no heroes left. And that's a strange state of being, to not respect anybody who's on the Wheaties box anymore. And it makes me wonder, what are we leaving our kids with? Who is there for our kids to look up to? If Michael Jordan is the example, is the role model, and Michael Jordan likes to gamble at golf games, does that mean Michael Jordan isn't a good person? And what are we doing to kids when we tear down those people that they look up to? Are we basically teaching them that it's not important to try to be a good person, to try to reach your goal, because it's just going to be ripped out from under you, or you're going to be exposed? How many good people are there right now in this country who are afraid to run for political office because they have a skeleton in their closet? And what has that done to us? We are so cynical right now, aren't we, about public leaders, about political leaders, about Congress, about the president. How many times over the last couple of months have I heard you call and talk about they're all alike, they're all crooks, they're all liars, they're all thieves, they're all out for their own good? And it amazes me how many people have adopted this attitude and accepted this common public theory that's floating in the air right now, that no matter how good and decent a person you are and how well motivated or how proper your motivations are, when you decide to run for office, once you get elected, you automatically or suddenly get this disease. It's like this infectious disease that comes over you when you now become that public official, and then everybody doesn't believe you. And then everybody thinks you're a fool, or you've been bought out, or you have abandoned us. It's this whole phenomenon amazes me, and I wonder who's left that we don't tear down, that we don't feel the need to tear down. Well, maybe it's Mother Teresa, who's coming to Charlotte next Tuesday, I think. Is there anybody else? Is there anybody else who's a real hero anymore? I really want you to tell me whether there are any heroes left. Because I'm amazed when we sit around and start trying to figure out who they are. Is there anybody that you can call and tell me about that you flat out totally admire and respect without putting a qualifying phrase on it that says, except for this? Is there anybody left like that? 570-1110, 1-800-WBT-1110 at 10 till 1. I'm Jerry Klein. Be back in a minute.
To talk to Jerry Klein, call 570-1110 in Charlotte, 1-800-WBT-1110 long distance, and on Bell Atlantic Mobile, star 1110.
6 minutes before 1, News Talk 1110 WBT. Let's go to the phones. Kelly, how are you?
Hi, fine. Who's this?
I'm Jerry.
Oh, hey. This is the first time I've ever called a radio station and the first time I've ever even listened to you.
Well, I'm glad you called.
Well, I was just thinking about you talking about the heroes, and I feel that the celebrity that is most likely to have remained a hero is Elvis Presley.
Why?
And because it may have been in the era that he grew and developed, you know, his celebrity status.
Mm-hmm.
And even though everything that he's already been through with his drug addiction and everything else, it seems as though people still follow him, even though he's dead, or people think that he's dead, or some still think he's alive. But
well, help me figure this out, Kelly, because I'm going to be honest with you and tell you that I never got it about Elvis Presley.
Well, I don't even have a idol. I have never idolized anybody. I don't have a hero. I don't have anything like that. But as far as just listening to your show and picking one,
Mm-hmm.
I feel that is an idol for people or a hero that they've not diminished and tore apart, I would think that it would be him.
Well, I mean, there's something to what you say. But Elvis Presley was an entertainer. And I'm not sure, I've never understood why people held him up in such high regard, and why people weren't more ready to condemn him about his excesses.
Maybe because the media wasn't so powerful back then as they are now. And it seems as though the media takes anything that's negative against a person and just blasts it for everybody.
Well, I think that, I obviously think that's true. But with something else that you said, I think almost really, really caught me. You don't have any heroes?
No, I don't have any heroes. I've never had an idol or a hero.
Then how do you decide who or what you ought to be when you grow up?
Because I just trust in God. That's the truth. I just believe that He is the perfect person that everybody and all the parents should be teaching their children to follow after.
Okay, well, that's obviously a high principle and a noble sentiment, but you can't be God.
No, you can't. That's right. I'm not saying that you can, but if you follow his ways and what he's taught, and then I believe you'll lead a straight path, and you don't need to idolize. You're never supposed to put other people before him anyway and idolize them.
But you tell me that you've really not had anybody that you say, that's really somebody that I admire and that I would like to be like sometime in my life?
No, I look at people in the community and hear that are successful, and I have respect for them for what they've accomplished. But no, I don't say that I would like to be like them. I think that success, as you were saying, if you don't get rich or famous, are you saying that your life is not successful? I think that success comes from within, and if you're happy with your family and yourself, then you are successful. And you don't need those heroes and everything to carry you on like that.
Well, I obviously agree with you. I don't think that we give enough credit to that in this society, and I think that's sad.
I think that's why there's so much downfall in the new generation, because they're always looking for somebody to be like, and they're not finding themselves at all. They're wanting to be like this, that. Now, this new generation that's just coming up, you can tell they're all different, and they have their own mindset. They're not into trendy things. They wear what they want. They do what they want, and I like that. They're learning on their own, I guess.
Well, is that partly because everybody that ought to have been their heroes has been blown up?
That may be, and it may also be because of their parents. Their parents didn't have guidance as they were growing up, I believe, because they were in the 60s and 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And so they didn't actually know how to give their child something to look forward to. And this is kind of like the lost generation who's finding their own way.
Well, I think that describes my older son pretty well, as a matter of fact. He's pretty much rejected a lot of the artificiality of celebrityhood, and is just trying to live his life and be a good person.
Right. Well, there's so much competition in the world now anyway, and people, if you look up to somebody or expect somebody to be like them, then there's so much negativity on yourself. You see the stress on children nowadays and young adults. They just carry so much stress on them every day trying to compare to whoever, compete with whoever, be the best at this. And you can't do it, and you can't expect that to happen. And I think, like you said back in, years ago, nobody cared about being rich and famous, and, they looked at people and knew that they were that, but they were happy living on the farm, doing what they did.
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays, there's so much competition and pressure on young people.
Well, I think what you said, I'm going to have to break for the news in just a second, but I think what you said that hits the nail on the head is that we're all caught up, or a lot of people are caught up in trying to compare themselves to somebody else and to somebody else's achievement or standards that we're not going to be able to reach.
Right.
And I think that's part of what that leads to a disillusionment that we don't know how to handle. I appreciate your call, and I hope you'll call again, Kelly.
Okay, bye.
Thanks a lot. And stay with me on the lines, will you, folks? 570-1110, 1-800-WBT-1110. And let's see if we can figure out if there are still people around that we ought to admire. I'll be back in a minute.
99.3 WBZK-FM Jefferson and 1110 WBT Charlotte. The flagship station of Jefferson Pilot Communications.
The 1110 WBT exclusive AccuWeather. Partly cloudy and humid overnight with a thunderstorm in spots, especially north and east of Charlotte. A low temperature 72. Friday and Saturday, sunshine along with patchy clouds, hot and humid. High temperature both days 90 to 94. This is meteorologist Dave Bowers with 1110 WBT's exclusive AccuWeather.
72 degrees at News Talkie at 1110 WBT, your official weather station.
To talk to Jerry Klein, call 570-1110 in Charlotte, 1-800-WBT-1110 long distance, and on Bell Atlantic Mobile, star 1110.
So let's spend this hour with you telling me what you think about how we deal with people who achieve some level of public recognition in this society. and whether you still have anybody you admire, and if there's anybody left that we haven't torn apart at this point. George, good evening. How are you? George, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, George.
Yeah, the radio off here. Okay, Jerry.
Mm-hmm.
You were mentioning before the news break about there seems to be a lack of qualified people running for public office or to be our heroes.
I think there are a lot of good people who are afraid to run for office.
Well, there's one who was my hero and is my hero, and I would like to see him become successful in the future, and I think he will be. And his name is Ollie North.
No, please, George.
And if he was personally, Ollie North is of the mindset of the same mindset as those Marines that rescued the down flyer in Bosnia. And he came out of the Vietnam War as a decorated hero, and he served his country and so on and so forth. And those people during that time frame that you admired and aspired to, the legacy that they passed on was the drug culture, which we can forgive you guys, but we'd never elect you to public office.
Well,
it never put you in a place of power.
Well, you already have, George. There are quite a lot of people who, quote, use drugs, who already are in office. And if you think that that's not true, well, then you're dreaming.
True, you know.
But look, yeah.
Ollie North is my hero.
Well, if that's, I'll give you this. Okay, I'll give you this much. I believe that Ollie North believes that he has done what he ought to have done for his country. But I also believe that Ollie North crossed the line into believing that he knew better than a lot of other people what this country ought to do, whether or not it was legal.
You can say the same thing about Bill Clinton.
Maybe.
Not worse.
I haven't yet seen him convicted of anything.
Oh, yeah. You give him that much credit. He hasn't been convicted of anything because of his cleverness, if you will, and his Clinton and Ollie North. What Ollie North did was for his country. The things that Bill Clinton has done in the past and probably in the present were for personal, selfish reasons.
No, George, I think that's despicable, and I think it's about as wrong as it can possibly be.
Not despicable.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you're ready to denigrate somebody who
degraded himself.
If he was out for his own good and nothing else, George, when he graduated from Georgetown as a Fulbright scholar and went to Oxford to study. What is it? How many people do you know who get to that level and then go back to Arkansas?
Well, anytime a person who would get to that level and then demonstrate against his country...
Oh, cut that out. You know,
he demonstrated against... He went to Oz.
Yeah, he did the right thing, George. He demonstrated against an immoral...
organized...
You know, I
participated in...
Look, I'm trying to give you due for Ollie North, who I think is basically scum. And you continue this whining over and over again about Clinton's demonstrating against the war. George,
that's right.
And he did the right thing. And one of these days, you're going to wake up and realize that the rest of the country figured out that those people who did what they had to do to stop a despicable policy were a hell of a lot more moral than those of you who continue to try to support something we had no business being a part of. It's such an old, whiny thing. One of these days, George, you'll get real.
Jerry, during that time frame, knowing what everybody knew then, not what they think they know now, but what they knew then, Bill Clinton still sizes up as a traitor and a coward.
Well, that's pathetic trash, George. Hey, if you didn't have the brains or the insight to understand what the rest of us did about that war, then all that says about you is your short-sightedness and your inability to understand what's real and important about being an American and being a patriot. It's not about doing whatever your country tells you to do, right or wrong, even if it's a despicable policy.
You know, you've been growing up yourself.
Really?
Well, your picture in the paper, what was it, a couple of weeks ago, whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And you still act like you're 15, 16 years old. You look.
Why is that, George? Because my hair's still long, George?
Like a slime ball now.
Why? Because my hair's still long, I'm acting like I'm 15 years old?
That's just looking, so I'll apologize for that.
Yeah, well, that...
He's going to grow up.
Yeah, I'll grow up. I'll grow up when you grow up. Thank you, George. Yeah, well... You're the kind of grown-up that I don't want anything to do with. Thank you for your call. Ollie North is scum. Thank you. Cordelia, hello.
Hi. Yeah, well, let me say this now. Don't hang up on me, please. Now, first of all, as a black woman, my heroes are still Booker T. Washington and Frederick Douglass. And I think many in the black community have gotten away from the self-sufficient, self-reliant ideas of those two great orators of our time. But my first and foremost hero, Jerry, will always be God Almighty. We've also gotten away from God in this country. And
I don't think we have at all.
Anyone that should know anything about the Holocaust is you. They had no code of ethics under Hitler, but yet you would condone people having any kind of a makeup of character, regardless of the iniquity in it. Martin Luther King Jr. said that be judged by the content of one's character, not the color of their skin.
Mm-hmm.
Jerry, you condone people's character, whether it is defunct in the worst connotation, and you seem to just let it go by the wayside.
Oh, Cordelia, you know, you keep wanting to call over and over again and try to talk. No, hush. I let you talk. Now, hush. It's amazing to me that you continue to believe that you can impose what you believe to be morality and ethics on everybody else, and that you have the only right answer as to what constitutes that.
You never want to hear my point of view.
No, your point of view is a broken record, Cordelia. You start whining about women who have babies that they can't afford. You start talking about all the rest of that stuff, and it gets old. It's real nice for you.
You are very hostile towards me as a black woman.
It's got nothing to do with you being a black woman, Cordelia.
You're always hostile towards me. You're not hostile towards your white listeners. That is for sure. Because you should know what the Holocaust was. They had no code of ethics under Adolf Hitler.
Now I am going to hang up on you. Good night, Cordelia. Thank you for your call. Terry, how are you?
Hello. Boy, they're ganging up on you there.
Well, let them try.
Well, I had one hero till tonight, but now I've got two. My first one was Jimmy Carter, because he's led a good life and backed up all his words with good deeds, and he wasn't the most popular president in the world, but I don't think he found any dirt on him.
Well, I'll second that vote in a heartbeat, Terry. I think Jimmy Carter is a class act and always was.
Yeah, in history, he's going to give him more credit for what the public did during his term of office.
Mm-hmm.
He's had at least 3 shooting wars in the last 5 years.
Well, and the thing about Jimmy Carter is that regardless of what you thought about him as a president, and I think he did a lot of good things, and he did some things that he didn't handle quite so well. But he was still a relatively young man when he got out of the presidency. What other ex-president do you know who's lived the kind of life that he has after he left that office?